It is hard to believe 50 years ago on November 10th, 1975, the Great Lakes claimed one of its greatest mysteries. The Edmund Fitzgerald, a 729-foot freighter called the Toledo Express, vanished beneath the waves of Lake Superior with all 29 men on board.
So we remember the 29 souls lost in the gales of November, now 5 decades later. Welcome to this special presentation, The Sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald, only on WTOL 11+. I'm Chief Meteorologist Chris Vickers.
And I'm Jeff Smith. Now, half a century later, the story of the Edmund Fitzgerald still echoes across Northwest Ohio and Southeast Michigan. Built, crewed, and remembered right here in Toledo.
We look back at the storm that changed the Great Lakes shipping forever and the people that keep her memory alive.
I really didn't believe that a ship that size would sink.
Believe it or not, the Edmund Fitzgerald, nicknamed the Toledo Express, vanished beneath the water nearly 50 years ago. Christened in 1958, the Edmund Fitzgerald was the largest ship on the Great Lakes at the time. The 729-foot iron ore freighter was a workhorse and set records year after year, hauling taconite from Duluth to Detroit, Toledo, and other ports on the Great Lakes. But in the night of November 10th, 1975, even this mighty vessel couldn't endure the gales of November that unleashed hurricane-force winds and 35-foot waves on Lake Superior.
We're holding our own. We're holding our own.
Captain McSorley bravely navigated the storm and radioed the ship had a bad list, was taking on water, had lost radar, and was struggling to stay on course. Minutes later, the Fitzgerald disappeared. No distress call, no survivors.
We'll never forget our family members that did go down. We'll never forget them.
Through the night, rescue crews clung to hope and searched the stormy lake.
And knowing a little about hypothermia and the temperature of the water and, of course, the legend of Lake Superior, we knew that if we found anyone alive, it would be a miracle.
The next morning, November 11th, 1975, news spread across the Great Lakes. Churches tolled their bells 29 times, once for each soul on board. Families braced for the worst.
I was on my way to work in my car about 7 o'clock the next morning of November the 11th, and the news came on my radio.
And I remember going into my mom's bedroom and telling her, and she thought, no, you're making a mistake, you heard it wrong.
He loved us very, very, very much. He had tons of friends, and anytime anybody would talk about my dad, everybody loved my dad.
Polite, liked his ice cream at night. He'd sneak in because he worked 4 to 8 and didn't have time most of the time for his dessert, so I'd give it to him. He'd come through the back and get his ice cream with me. I was always happy to see him.
The loss was devastating. Questions lingered, theories piled up, failed hatches, shifting cargo, rogue waves, shallow shoals.
It doesn't really matter how it happened. It just happened. And we'll never know.
Among all uncertainty, families knew one thing. The wreck site was sacred. They fought to keep it undisturbed and instead brought the ship's bell to the surface. A bell that now rings every November 10th, carrying the names of the 29 men who never came home.
Because the bell is a very spiritual type thing. I think I might say it's spiritual in that it's the voice of the ship.
Jeff, what's so incredible about this, to this day, nearly 50 years later, there has never been a ship lost on the Great Lakes the size of the Edmund Fitzgerald, but it's so much more than that. It's really about the lives and the connection to Northwest Ohio right here.
It's amazing as you were laying out all of the different possibilities of things, and then you have a family member who said, it doesn't matter how it happened.
That gave me chills when I heard that, too, because exactly right. This is forever cemented in history. What happened to the Edmund Fitzgerald that night on November 10th, 1975. How it exactly sunk still remains somewhat of a mystery. There are theories on that, but she's exactly right. It doesn't matter. It happened, and those lives are forever changed.
The sinking of the ship hits home personally for some in our community. That list includes two men who at one time served on the Fitz. Steve Iwanicki sat down with both sailors to hear their stories.
Moved to Northwood.
62.
A simple ad in the paper is what sparked a career on the Great Lakes for Mike Kapser. Now living in Northwood, but originally from Minnesota.
There was an ad in the paper, you know, to sail on the boats on the Great Lakes. So I went up to Duluth and I signed up.
A Navy veteran who spent nearly 5 decades on the water. What year did you retire from it?
June 98.
And through all those years, one ship stayed with him.
Well, that was the best at that time. Yeah, that was the best.
From 1969 to 1972, Kapser served as third mate on the Edmund Fitzgerald, an officer and second in command to the captain. Alongside a crew of 30, he made trips back and forth from Minnesota through Lake Superior and through the port of Toledo.
It was the busiest, back then, it was the busiest port in the world.
And the journeys were long.
The trip took about six and a half days, round trip. For every 2 months you get a 28 days vacation.
After the Fitzgerald, Kapser worked on several ships, including his last, the Columbia Star.
1,000 foot long.
Wow. And you served on that one?
Yeah, that's the last one I was on. I was on there 8 years.
Even now, he still remembers the morning he learned the Fitzgerald was gone.
We didn't know, I think, until maybe 6, 7 o'clock in the morning the next day.
The news spread.
Before he even said the name of the ship, I feared the worst.
In the 60s, Tom Walton called the Edmund Fitzgerald home.
This is the summer of 1963.
Serving meals on the ship at 19 years old.
We got to the dock in time, board the ship at 5 o'clock, and immediately began serving my first meal as a porter in the galley on the Fitzgerald. It was like a dream come true.
Still with memories in his mind and closet.
This is a towel actually off the Fitzgerald. Wow. With the name Steamer Edmund Fitzgerald stitched on the end.
But one keepsake hits harder than the rest.
This is a picture of my uncle who died.
Oh, wow. What was his name?
Grant Walton.
Grant, listed as Ralph G. Walton, was one of the 29 crew members lost that night the Fitzgerald sank. He was working deep in the engine room.
It saddens me so much to think of that jolly, jovial guy in that awful moment of terror, knowing what was about to happen when it was too late to do anything about it.
Now 50 years later, Walton is keeping their memory alive, speaking in schools and museums to share the story of the Fitzgerald and the men aboard it.
It becomes, with each passing year, a little less important, I think, to the masses, but it will never be less important to those of us who went through the loss and so forth.
Even now, 50 years later, one church close to home shares a special connection with the Fitz. Megan Hartnett shares how it honors not only those aboard the ship, but all those who sail the Great Lakes.
Recognition came thanks to our good friend Gordon Lightfoot.
The cathedral Lightfoot sings about in his famous song is the Mariners Church in Detroit. The ballad brought it into the spotlight, but the church's connection to the maritime community comes from long before.
Our founder, Julia Anderson, didn't want to have pew tax, and so for these sailors who would come in, take a shower, and worship their Lord, our Lord, and get back on their ship.
The 183-year-old church is just blocks away from the Detroit River and greeted sailors from all over.
All throughout our sanctuary and throughout our church, we have maritime symbols both from the Bible and from shipping.
But its bell brought it its notoriety in 1975 when then Rector Richard Ingalls was told of the Edmund Fitzgerald sinking and rang the bell 29 times, one for each man on the ship.
But if someone were lost in the Great Lakes, I tolled the Brotherhood bell in our tower, and then came into the church and had private devotions, kind of a informal requiem. And I did that morning, rang the bell 29 times.
I'm glad that it all happened that way because it does memorialize a very important part of the history of the Great Lakes, and we're just grateful to be a small part of that.
Even 50 years later, Reverend Todd Meyer says people from all over the country and from Canada will come to try and see the church and the bell.
To this day, you know, we have people coming by at least weekly.
The church does a memorial service annually in conjunction with the anniversary of the Edmund Fitzgerald sinking, remembering not just the 29 men, but for all who have sailed the Great Lakes. The church is doing a memorial weekend filled with stories, songs, and multiple services for the 50th anniversary.
To not forget not just the men who died on the Edmund Fitzgerald, but never forgetting how important the maritime community is to our community.
Reporting in Detroit, Megan Hartnett, WTOL 11.
Just up the road, the Edmund Fitzgerald services start on November 8th, all leading up to the day that marks 50 years since the ship went down, November 10th.
Well, as we go ahead and mark the 50 years since the Edmund Fitzgerald sank in Lake Superior, taking all the 29 crew members with it, how about this? 68 swimmers took on a 411-mile relay following the ship's planned route from Lake Superior, Wisconsin, all the way down to Detroit. Amanda Fay talked with a local woman who was part of this monumental undertaking.
Michelle Howard of Monroe is an endurance swimmer. She spends a lot of time here at Sterling State Park training in the open water of Lake Erie. Her latest challenge, a 411-mile relay to honor the crew of the Edmund Fitzgerald.
There are 17 stages total. I swam in the 12th stage of the event, which was from the very tip of the thumb down to Port Harbor.
While conditions here on Lake Erie are fairly ideal, Lake Huron had other plans for Howard's team during their 3-day window.
For our section of the swims, there were like 8 to 10 foot waves, just white caps, massive rollers. The boat could barely get out in it, let alone swimmers, let alone trying to get on and off of a boat that's bobbing like crazy.
Howard's team had to adapt, swimming their 22 miles inside a protected harbor instead of the open lake. But they got it done. The relay was organized by Jim Dreyer, with all proceeds going to restore the historic Whitefish Point Lighthouse.
The Whitefish Point is where the bell of the Edmund Fitzgerald is housed in our museum. Tens of thousands of people go there a year to see it. This is the oldest active lighthouse on Lake Superior. Was built in 1861.
For Howard, this wasn't just another swimming challenge. It was personal.
All the swimmers get the commemorative plaque that has 29 individual pellets, one for each of the lives that was lost in the sinking. And then each one of the swimmers also carried an iron ore pellet with them while swimming. This one has more meaning behind it. We're doing it for a purpose, for a commemoration. And it was kind of just a cool cultural Michigan thing to get behind.
The Great Lakes proved challenging for all 17 stages of swimmers, but Adkins says their determination never wavered.
The 29 men, their lives mean something to them to be remembered and honored.
It took about a month, but the swimmers completed their 411-mile journey, ending at the Mariners Cathedral in Detroit, the same church mentioned in Gordon Lightfoot's famous song about the Edmund Fitzgerald. A fitting end to an extraordinary tribute. 68 swimmers, 411 miles, and 29 names that will never be forgotten. Reporting in Monroe, Amanda Fay, WTOL 11.
Jeff, the thing that's so incredible about this, the 411 miles that was completed, and you could kind of put some perspective on this as being a swimmer, that is expected to be deemed the longest relay swim that has ever been completed in the Great Lakes. So great way to honor this anniversary.
Watching that video, we were talking about it earlier, and I just said, the open water swims are so difficult, right? Because you need guidance. You need to know where you're headed, because obviously, and you see that Lake Erie footage, but you can't see. You don't see a bottom. You don't see in front of you unless you're picking your head up. But when you pick your head up, that taxes you even more as a swimmer.
It taxes you, and it was a team effort, 68 total swimmers, and they took basically 4 at a time, took intervals doing that. One thing that really stood out, I followed this very closely over the summer, one of the legs not only had to go through the Sioux locks, they actually weren't able to swim through the Sioux locks. Coast Guard wouldn't let them do that. But once they got beyond that, they actually had to cross Lake Huron. One leg in particular was over 32 miles. It took them about 17 and a half hours to complete it, and they finished it at 2:30 in the morning, swimming through the middle of the night across Lake Huron.
Wow. And the temperature differential of all of those lakes,
it was
astounding
in the 50s,
as well.
low 60s when they did much of the swimming over the course of the summer, so it definitely was quite chilly.
Well, stay with us. Our look back at 50 years. The Edmund Fitzgerald sinking continues here on WTOL 11+.
What makes the Maritime Academy of Toledo so special? Let's ask our graduates.
Maritime is a really great school. I think that a lot of the staff members are very, very caring for their students. I think that Maritime offers great opportunities for kids.
Maritime is one of the best schools that I've been to. The teachers there, they care about their students.
Maritime Academy offers small classes, hands-on learning, and college prep, all in a supportive, family-like environment. Visit maritimeacademy.us for more information.
Welcome back into this special presentation remembering 50 years since the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald. It is really a story that is tied to Toledo's roots, Chris.
Jeff, it absolutely is, and one that has a very lasting impact on Toledo's workforce, one that helped shape the Great Lakes shipping industry that kept freighters like the Fitzgerald moving. Steve Iwanek shows us how the city's labor on shore played a vital role in life on the lakes.
Almost every day, ships like these glide along the Maumee River. But below deck, there's more than just cargo and steel. You find an unfinished chapter in Toledo's story.
Toledo is a major partner in all Great Lakes shipping, and then within that, meaning all over the U.S. commerce.
Coal, grain, salt. For generations, raw materials have left Toledo's docks and have been carried across the Great Lakes on freighters like the Edmund Fitzgerald. Carrie Soden with the National Museum of the Great Lakes says it's part of a system that connects Toledo to the rest of the country.
You look at a map of railroads across Ohio, you will see a lot of the north-south. They seem to come into Cleveland. You might see a couple come into like the Sandusky, Huron area, and a ton of them come up into Toledo, and that's all because that's that transportation hub.
And that hub throughout time has only grown. Joe Capel with the Toledo-Lucas County Port Authority says Toledo has a heavy shipping presence, and that the Port of Toledo today handles more than 11 million tons of cargo a year, meaning big business and big bucks.
All of their activity collectively supports over 18,000 jobs in our region and has a combined economic benefit of $6.2 billion annually for the community. So the port operations are certainly a huge economic driver for the whole Toledo region and beyond.
But Capel admits there's issues with workforce development. That's where he says the Port Authority is working with school districts to recruit future sailors.
We're one of the largest U.S. ports on the Great Lakes, and with that comes tremendous opportunity for employment. These are good paying jobs on the shore and at sea. And I think that if more people were aware, they would become interested.
But if you ask those who know it best, shipping isn't just about cargo. It's about the calloused hands of thousands who loaded ships, repaired hulls, and kept the industry moving, and those in the future who will keep it going.
There is something to be exceptionally proud of, and knowing that you're changing the world for a better place if you were to work on a Great Lakes freighter, work at a Great Lakes dock, helped build ships or repair ships.
Past, present, and future. Toledo's place on the water isn't just geography, it's legacy. And every ship that leaves this river carries a piece of it with them. Steve Iwanek, WTOL 11.
Well, as you see, the story of the Edmund Fitzgerald sinking really runs through Toledo. Of course, part of the history remains in the Great Lakes Museum, but another part you might not have ever seen before. It lives on in Bowling Green. It's the data hidden in decades-old weather records, ship logs, handwritten observations that help us recreate the storm that sank the so-called Toledo Express.
Out beyond the point there, we were taking water 6 feet high right across our deck.
They were right in the section with the max wind speed and the max wave height, so just the worst of all possible outcomes, essentially.
The last time I talked with him, he said he was holding his own.
November 10th, 1975, the day that changed Great Lakes history. To understand and recreate the historic storm that ultimately sunk the Edmund Fitzgerald, I visited the archives at the BGSU Jerome Library, the only place that houses official weather records from the long-closed National Weather Service here in Toledo and handwritten ship logs. This page right here says November 9th, 1975.
Correct, the day before the sinking, and as you can see, even in Lake Erie, it was a very calm day.
Mark Sprang, an archivist who has spent years studying Great Lakes history, has uncovered original weather observation logs from other ships that fateful night. What he's found reveals just how quickly conditions deteriorated.
It was just the complete wrong combination of circumstances. The speed of the storm, the weather reports weren't always keeping up fast enough for how fast the conditions were changing.
The Fitzgerald smoothly set sail from near Duluth on the morning of November 9th. At 2:39 p.m., a gale warning was issued. Captain McSorley knew the storm was coming. The Fitzgerald and her sister ship, the Arthur M. Anderson, had altered course.
They went along the north shore of Lake Superior because that's where the wind was initially coming from, and then it shifted completely the other way, so they were completely exposed.
Conditions deteriorated quickly on the morning of November 10th.
We get to 2909 by 2:30 on the 10th, so that's a huge change.
In modern meteorology, we have a term for such rapid intensification, a bomb cyclone. The pressure drop measured at Sault Ste. Marie was incredible, and it happened faster than anyone expected.
You could see these rapid drops in pressure, rapid increases in wind speed, wave height, especially from some of these stations on the east end of Lake Superior, because that meant the wind had the whole length of the lake to grow those waves.
These lake weather bulletins were radioed between captains, creating a real-time network of weather observations across all 5 Great Lakes. Crucial weather data for the times. At 2 a.m. on November 10th, the storm was rapidly gathering strength. The gale warning was upgraded to a more dire storm warning. The storm center passing just over eastern Lake Superior just after daybreak. By 2:30 that afternoon, according to ship logs on the Great Lakes, conditions had become extreme. Winds over 60 miles per hour, gusts to hurricane force, and 20-foot waves were reported, easily high enough to wash over the decks of loaded freighters.
And they're right there where the X is, right on the edge of the purple, which is the worst place to be.
The Arthur M. Anderson, a 767-foot iron ore carrier, had been traveling in tandem with the Fitzgerald through the voyage and through the worst of the storm. The two ships were in constant radio contact as the conditions worsened. Captain Cooper, watching his radar screen, could see the Fitzgerald about 10 to 15 miles ahead. At approximately 7:10 on November 10th, Captain Cooper made contact one final time. McSorley's voice crackled through the storm. "We are holding our own." Those would be the last words anyone would ever hear from the Edmund Fitzgerald. Minutes later, at the peak of the storm, in the midst of a heavy snow squall and a series of massive rogue waves, the Fitzgerald vanished from the Anderson's radar. No distress signal, no survivors. The Fitzgerald sank suddenly in Canadian waters just north of Whitefish Point. Now in 530 feet of water, where it rests as a gravesite and memorial to this day. Well, the aftermath of this disaster, in the wake of it, shipping industry groups lobbied for dramatic improvements in weather forecasting. So Captain Cooper of the Arthur M. Anderson, the last person who saw the Fitzgerald, worked directly with the National Weather Service to identify gaps in weather coverage. To this day, there has never been a ship this large lost on the Great Lakes. Jeff, over to you.
All right, Chris, the Great Lakes have long been known for power. and peril. From fur traders in hand-built canoes to overloaded steamships of the 1800s, history shows how sudden and violent storms have claimed countless lives. Even with modern ships, the lakes give little warning. Here are meteorologists Ryan Weekman and John Birchfield.
Here with meteorologist John Birchfield. John, this was a storm unlike any other.
Yeah, certainly in terms of both the winds, the waves, and things really escalated and played a role in the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald.
They absolutely did. So let's take you to this storm and the path of this one, very unique, coming straight out of Iowa, and how compact and strong that this was is what combined to produce this disaster. So the Edmund Fitzgerald leaves port, leaves Duluth on November 9th. Reports some pretty good waves as it's moving through the western portions of Lake Superior, moves across the central basin, and things actually settle down for a little while, but then here come the big waves. It's that southward turn. The waves come out of the west, and that's where disaster strikes. And John, it's hard to fathom just how big that these waves really were. Put it in perspective for us, the timing of all of this.
Yeah, the storm really ramped up exactly when the Edmund Fitzgerald was making that fateful voyage, and the weather coincides with some of the reports that we're seeing. So the morning of November 10th, that is when the waves and the winds really started to pick up, and we do have some data out on the Great Lakes that shows 35-knot wind gusts. That's equivalent to 40+ miles per hour, and in terms of the waves on the waters, 10-foot waves. At that point in time, Captain McSorley decided to slow down the speed of the Edmund Fitzgerald ever so slightly to account for the weather. During the afternoon, the storm intensified. We have some reports of 50-knot wind gusts. That is equivalent to 58 miles per hour, and that really kicked up the waves as well. Now, to make matters worse, visibility dropped as precipitation started, and during the month of November, that precip was snow. Around 2:45 p.m., there are reports of snow, in addition to those powerful wind gusts and high waves out on the Great Lakes. Now, things went from bad to worse during the evening. Wind gusts topped out at approximately 75 knots during that evening. That's equivalent to over 80 miles per hour, and that corresponds to wave heights historic of 35 feet. And all that combined, the snow, the wind, and the waves contributed to the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald. Forecasting technology has improved drastically since the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald. The first GOES satellite image came back in the middle of October of 1975, just weeks before the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald. Technology has come a long way, and it's made forecasting over the Great Lakes considerably easier. We now have buoy data that provides real-time weather information over the Great Lakes. High-resolution computer models help us predict the future and tell you what kind of weather is coming. Also, real-time data provides current observations. We also have modern radar that provides a current look at storms and storm data, and also improved warnings make forecasting much more advanced and specific. Of course, all of this technology would have come in handy back then, but it does ensure that something like the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald will not happen again in the future.
So as of right now, only the bell of the Edmund Fitzgerald has been removed from the site of the shipwreck. It sits proudly in the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum in Whitefish Point, Michigan. But there's a replica bell on the ship, and the wreckage now is a memorial to the 29 souls lost 50 years ago. Meteorologist Davis Wells takes us inside the history of shipwrecks and recovery on the Great Lakes.
The sinking of the SS Edmund Fitzgerald in 1975 is one of the most well-known shipwrecks in Great Lakes history, but it's far from the only one. Hundreds of vessels have met their end in these waters over the centuries. For researchers, these wrecks are a unique opportunity to study the past. When a ship goes missing, the search begins with historical records like its last known location or radio signal. Planes then take off using technology to locate large pieces of metal.
They were able to catch the magnetic signature, and then from that using side scanning sonar to be able to identify that there was a wreck present.
While technology helps with the discovery, the conditions of the Great Lakes pose their own set of challenges, particularly the depth. Lake Superior, where the Edmund Fitzgerald lies, is too deep for human divers.
Is that it's beyond the depths that humans can dive safely, to have enough time on the bottom to be able to explore and document in the ways that underwater archaeologists typically do, which then requires the unmanned vehicles or submarine technology to be able to get to that depth.
It's not uncommon to find wood or even rope intact on these wrecks. However, an increasing threat to these historical sites is invasive species like zebra mussels, which can degrade metal. Beyond the archaeological importance, these sites are also considered sacred and private spaces for the families of those lost, which are illegal to alter or destroy in Canadian water.
For those ends, I would encourage anybody who's out diving just to make sure that they don't disrupt the site itself, both for the archaeological significance, the historical significance, but also noting that they would be sacred spaces as somebody's final resting place.
Dr. Baltus says that while large-scale shipwrecks have decreased significantly over time due to advancements in technology and shipping, there are still many undiscovered vessels in the Great Lakes. The Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum at Whitefish Point is a great resource to learn more about these fascinating pieces of history. Davis Wells, WTOL 11.
So, Jeff, let me put this in perspective for you. From 1950 all the way back in time, there was an estimated 8,000 shipwrecks on the Great Lakes. From 1950 to 1975, it had decreased to about 14. So there was a point in the mid-1970s where we had thought that essentially ships were somewhat unsinkable on the Great Lakes.
Yeah, it's amazing. The 8,000 figure is just hard to wrap your mind around. Our look back and our look forward continues here on WTOL 11 Plus. 50 years, the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald, right after this.
What makes the Maritime Academy of Toledo so special? Let's ask our graduates.
Maritime is a really great school. I think that a lot of the staff members are very, very caring for their students. I think that Maritime offers great opportunities for kids.
Maritime is one of the best schools that I've been to. The teachers there, they care about their students.
Maritime Academy offers small classes, hands-on learning, and college prep, all in a supportive, family-like environment. Visit maritimeacademy.us for more information.
So earlier in the show, we introduced you to two men who once served aboard the Edmund Fitzgerald, Mike Kapser of Northwood and Tom Walton of Sylvania. But for Walton, November 10th, 1975 carries a far deeper meaning. He lost a family member on that tragic night. Steve Iwanek sat down with him to talk about this, his time on the ship, and the loss that stayed with him ever since.
That's you on the Edmund Fitzgerald. How old are you in that picture?
19.
You're 19. Tom Walton can say he held a summer job few others could. In 1963, the BGSU student applied for work on the Great Lakes, never expecting the call that came next.
Never anticipating to get a call, and certainly never anticipating to be with the flagship of the fleet, the Edmund Fitzgerald, but that's what happened.
For 3 months, Walton worked as a porter, serving meals aboard the Fitzgerald, alongside his father, Wade, the ship's chief engineer.
Which was pretty cool, especially when you consider that the chief engineer has wonderfully well-appointed quarters, and porters do not.
Yeah.
Okay, you know, so I was the envy of the galley crew.
All aboard the Queen of the Great Lakes.
It was 729 feet long, which, in hindsight, was it too long? That's an argument for another day. But it was the biggest, grandest ship on the Great Lakes.
Over the years, Walton's kept a few mementos from that summer, starting with this.
This is a towel actually off the Fitzgerald, with the name Steamer Edmund Fitzgerald stitched on the end.
And a reminder of what the ship carried, taconite, otherwise known as iron ore.
So they would roll around in rough seas. And when I dropped these, you could tell how heavy they are. Yeah. And you can imagine the noise or the force of 26,000 tons of them in the cargo hold, yeah.
Walton's collection also includes commemorative coins and a familiar song.
Without Gordon Lightfoot, would we even be standing here today to talk about this? I don't know, probably maybe not, because that song is what keeps the memory alive.
But one keepsake means the most.
This is a picture of my uncle who died.
Oh, wow. What was his name?
Grant Walton.
Grant, listed as Ralph G. Walton, was one of the 29 crew members lost that night. Walton was in California, watching the news when the report came out.
I knew there weren't many vessels still out there in November, and I knew that in really bad weather, a long vessel with a vulnerable midsection could be especially impacted by that. So before he even said the name of the ship, I feared the worst.
Grant was an oiler working third shift, deep in the engine room.
It saddens me so much to think of that jolly, jovial guy in that awful moment of terror, knowing what was about to happen when it was too late to do anything about it.
Today, Grant rests in Sycamore, a village south of Tiffin. His grave reads, Grant R. Walton, lost at sea, November 10th, 1975. A date forever etched in Walton's memory.
November 10th is always difficult for me, especially around the dinner hour, because I know exactly what the porters are doing around the dinner hour, and what my dad would have been doing if he'd been aboard, certainly what my uncle was doing. So yeah, as 7 o'clock approaches, all I can think about are the lyrics of the song. So yeah, it weighs on me every year.
The Edmund Fitzgerald vanished beneath the waves of Lake Superior, never completing the voyage to Detroit. But another ship that's been mentioned, Chris, the Arthur M. Anderson, was crossing Lake Superior in tandem with the Fitz that night, witnessing the storm and sounding the final radio calls to the Fitzgerald.
So the Arthur M. Anderson and the Fitzgerald both charted a northerly path together on Lake Superior on November 9th, hoping to avoid the worst of the storm. Now, on the evening of November 10th, it was the Anderson that was just miles behind the Edmund Fitzgerald in one of Lake Superior's most ferocious storms. In fact, when the Fitzgerald had actually lost both of its radars, the Anderson came in and used it for navigation and guided the Fitzgerald toward Whitefish Bay. Winds at that time were topping 60 miles per hour, and Jeff, waves had built to about 30 feet. And in those final hours, the Anderson's radar was among the last to track the Fitzgerald before it disappeared below Lake Superior sometime around 7:10 p.m.
And Tom Walton was talking about that 7 o'clock hour being so difficult for him. Captain Cooper of the Anderson received the Fitz's final transmission, quote, "We are holding our own." Moments later, the ship was gone. When Coast Guard rescue attempts were delayed by the storm, it was the Anderson that turned back into the gale to search for survivors, a decision that cemented her place in Great Lakes maritime history. The Arthur M. Anderson survived the storm that night and went on to serve for decades after that tragic night, hauling iron ore, coal, and grain across the Great Lakes well into the 21st century. Even after her initial retirement and later refit in 2019, the Anderson remained one of the oldest working freighters on the Great Lakes, a living link to that fateful November storm and to the memory of the Edmund Fitzgerald and her 29 lost crewmen.
So, Jeff, I think this is where it gets interesting. Many people ask, where's the Anderson today? Research conducted exclusively by WTOL 11 has actually tracked this historic ship right here to Toledo. So this is the video that you are looking at. The Arthur M. Anderson has actually been sighted in layup here in Toledo. Now, our records indicate that the Arthur M. Anderson arrived in port in Toledo sometime in mid-January of 2025, where this massive 767-foot, 20,000-ton bulk carrier quietly rests. Now, reports indicate that the Anderson had a sailing career that spanned over 70 years and recently sailed as early as last year. As far as what's next, officials that we've reached out to about the fate or future of the Arthur M. Anderson in Toledo have not responded to our comments or our requests for additional information. Bottom line, though, a piece of Great Lakes history forever linked to the Edmund Fitzgerald is now resting right here in Toledo. There's another freighter in Toledo it's a freighter that shares a very close connection to the Edmund Fitzgerald. There's another one, and meteorologist Kaylee Bowers shows us how these two ships compare and their legacies continue to shape Great Lakes history. Take a look.
While the Fitzgerald lies on the bottom of Lake Superior, the Schoonmaker survives, now docked in Toledo as a museum.
You know, in terms of similarities, the biggest one is that Great Lakes freighters from about 1905 till the 1980s were basically built along the same design. The Schoonmaker is riveted hull construction versus the Fitzgerald, which was welded, but more or less the same fundamental design.
Launched in 1911, the Schoonmaker sailed for decades carrying similar cargoes. In the 1970s, vessels passing through the Detroit River would have literally crossed paths with the Fitzgerald, including the Schoonmaker.
Back in the 1970s, every 15-20 minutes there would be a boat passing Detroit. So the two boats ran into each other in that general sense quite often across the lakes.
What caused the Fitzgerald's loss remains the topic of debate. Some fault loose hatch clamps, others suggest a hatch crane collapse, or that the ship ran aground on a shallow patch near Caribou Island.
The Coast Guard suggests that these hatches were not, and these hatch clamps were not tight enough, allowing an open hole that water could flow into that ultimately caused the Fitzgerald to lose buoyancy. The National Transportation Safety Board jumped into the picture, and they believed it was also topside flooding, but they said maybe something like the hatch crane. And if this device broke free and landed on top of one of the hatches, it might have had enough weight to collapse that hatch into itself. So the lake carrier said if she hit her bottom or had a near shoaling incident, the bottom cracked open. And over the next couple of hours, as the boat went left to right and up and down, slowly that crack became bigger and bigger, and more water flooded in from the bottom, not the top.
And while the Schoonmaker's pilot house echoes mid-20th century technology, modern freighters now navigate storms using radar, GPS, and instant communications, tools that were unavailable for the Fitzgerald's crew.
Today, a Great Lakes freighter can essentially look at a storm on radar and know exactly where it is, versus 1975, which the mariners just had basic reports about storm activity. So there was much more of a risk associated with sailing.
Today, the Schoonmaker is more than a museum. It's a bridge to the past and a venue for remembering the Fitzgerald.
Now, the story of the Edmund Fitzgerald has been well documented over the years. Many of us know, and it's been talked about a lot during this special, the Gordon Lightfoot song. There are also plenty of books about the ship, the crew, and the storm that brought it all down. Author John U. Bacon sat down with Chase Bachman to dive into Great Lakes history with the gales of November and reveal Toledo's central role in the Edmund Fitzgerald's final voyage.
Certainly my perspective on the Great Lakes changed dramatically. And this is the embarrassing part. Look, we're used to explaining to people in New York or LA, you got no idea how big these lakes are. You think they're lakes, they're actually inland seas. And you can't see across any of them, not because of the mist, because the earth curves too much. That's how big they are. So I'm used to that sense. And yet, even at that, Chase, I really had no idea, once again, just how big they are. The Great Lakes combined, the surface area, is bigger than Rhode Island, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, and the state of New York. So in other words, all of New England and the state of New York. Lake Superior is bigger than Ireland. This is how big these places are. So that was one thing. I was also shocked to learn, there's one big surprise I had. It was how dangerous these lakes really are. And you talk to experienced sailors, like John Hayes, who's from Ohio. Guys like this, they'll say that, and John Hayes sailed 23 years as a Great Lakes engineer and then 12 on the Atlantic Ocean. He says the Great Lakes are far more dangerous and it isn't even close. And anybody who's sailed both would tell you that. If we have a minute for this, I'll explain why. Salt water smashes down the waves and smooths them out, and it spreads them out also. So you get these kind of long roller coasters, still unpleasant, but not particularly dangerous. Whereas in the Great Lakes, they're still pointy like mountaintops, and they're twice as close together. Instead of 6 to 10 seconds apart, as they are on the ocean, they're 4 to 8 seconds apart. What does that mean? That means you can have your bow in one wave right here, 30 feet in the air. You can have your stern in another wave, 30 feet in the air, these 700-foot ships, which are gigantic. In the middle, you have nothing supporting it. And you've got 26,000 long tons of taconite. That's the equivalent of 4,000 adult elephants. So guess what? That's called sagging, and that's when it can crack. And then it goes over the next wave, and it does what's called hogging, which is draping over like this, and goes hogging and sagging, all the way down the lake for, hours. And after a while, it's like a paperclip. You bend a paperclip too many times, it's going to crack.
That's incredibly interesting perspective on that. Finally, as we mark 50 years since the Edmund Fitzgerald sank on Lake Superior, Quenched and Tempered Brewery is honoring the legacy in a way that blends history, community with craft beer. At Quenched and Tempered Brewery in Toledo, beer is about more than taste. For brewmaster Alex Drozdowitz, it's about telling a story, remembering history. The Edmund Fitzgerald, nicknamed the Toledo Express, was the pride of the Great Lakes Fleet before it sank in 1975, taking 29 lives with it.
We sat down over a couple of pints and talked about what we wanted to do, and we came up with copper ale since it was in the Great Lakes and you have the copper region and hauling back and forth all the different aggregates and copper ore. And it's going to be called the Toledo Express because that was the nickname of the Edmund Fitzgerald. And it just goes very well with who we are as Toledoans.
Drozdowitz, a welder and blacksmith by trade, crafted a copper ale to be smooth, slightly sweet, and approachable. Something everyone can raise a glass to in remembrance.
So we're trying to hit that precise middle point, but still have it be crafty and just embody the entire Toledo area and the memory of the Edmund Fitzgerald.
It's also a nod to Toledo's brewing history. Once booming before Prohibition, there's a resurgence again and a rapidly growing craft beer scene.
History and memories. Flavor has a lot to do with it, taste has a lot to do with it, visuals have a lot to do with it. My wife did the art, but being able to take something and consume it and sit back and savor it and think on the history and the memories of this event, that kind of adds a special flavor of itself.
For Alex, the ingredients in this commemorative Edmund Fitzgerald beer represent so much more.
The work it took, the laborers it took to actually build a ship like this, and then the people who actually took to man it, and then eventually losing their lives on their ship. That was their home for how many weeks out of a time, and being able to haul back and forth whatever they're putting into the hold.
On November 7th, in coordination with the National Museum of the Great Lakes, Quenched and Tempered will debut Toledo Express Copper Ale, with live music and even offering the last meal ever served aboard the Edmund Fitzgerald, chicken paprikash.
The wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald was in 1975. There's so much history in our city that as much as we can do to remember who we are, where we came from, our friends and our family who have built this or lost their lives building the area that we live in, any little way that we can commemorate them, we'll do. And we'll just do it with love, do it with collaboration, do it with community, share it with everybody.
Bringing the history and the memory of the largest ship ever to be lost in the gales of November on the Great Lakes back to life through the memories shared over a pint.
I brew them, my wife and I, we name them. She adds the art to it. She gives it a life through visual. I give it a life through tasting.
So the Toledo Express Copper Ale is going to be available at Quenched and Tempered starting on November 7th to kick off the weekend, and the memorial commemoration continuing straight through the 50th anniversary of the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald on November 10th.
It's really amazing. You hear so many things through history that are linked back. We always say in the newsroom, look at this story, there's probably a Toledo connection, but this one has played out obviously over the last 10 weeks of storytelling here at WTOL. 50 years have passed since the Edmund Fitzgerald disappeared beneath these cold November waters, but time has not silenced that story. It does live on in the families who still remember, in the mariners who still sail the Great Lakes, and in the people of Toledo, where the Fitz was built by hand and where her legacy endures.
Yeah, the Edmund Fitzgerald reminds us of how powerful the lakes can be and how much we owe to those that work on them. We continue to honor the 29 men who never made it home that fateful night and the generations who have kept their memory alive.
For Chief Meteorologist Chris Vickers and the entire WTOL 11 team, we appreciate you spending some time and watching this look back and remembering. I'm Jeff Smith.